Okay. Welcome back to the program for Portal to Ascension, New Realities. I have an incredible show here today with Ananda Saracena, and he's going to be talking about the anomalies on Mars. And there's a lot of anomalies. Ananda, welcome. How did you get started?
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, for the invitation. How did I get started? Well, all of this started for me with a personal experience, which happened on the 8th of July, 1964. I was on my way to school in southwest London one fine sunny morning with two of my friends when suddenly above our heads appeared three flying discs. These were the proverbial flying saucers. And I was the first one to spot them. I stopped, pointed them out to my friends, and the youngest of my two friends said immediately, flying saucers. And I turned around to him and I said, I don't think flying saucers exist. But in the next, I was forced to change my mind by the phenomenon that was right in front of our eyes. And these three objects formed a triangle and were moving very slowly in essentially a straight line across this blue sky. Now, remember, this is southwest London, Wimbledon, which is famous for the tennis tournaments, and not far from the flight path from Heathrow Airport. To me, this was very perplexing. These objects appeared to be very large. At that time, I was at school studying maths and physics prior to, in preparation for my university studies later on in engineering. So I was familiar with mathematical calculations, and based on what we observed, we calculated these objects, each of these three objects, to be about 70 feet in diameter, or somewhere between 35 and 70 feet in diameter.
And what year was this, you said? Sorry, what year?
1964.
Oh,
The
okay.
precise date was the 8th of July. I know this because we spoke about it, we documented it, I talked about it with my fellow pupils in the class and so forth. And these three objects, forming a triangular pattern, flew into a bank of clouds, and then they did not reappear. So it's as though there's something in the big bank of clouds that absorbed these three objects that we might call it a mothership in today's parlance. But these three flying discs went into this cloud and never reappeared. That's how I started this whole interest in extraterrestrial life.
And how old were you at the time? You were about how old?
I was 15 years old. And my
And
two
that,
friends, were 14 and 13. So these are three teenage boys walking down the road on a fine sunny morning, and we spot these three discs.
and just wondering, anyone else see it? Do you know anyone else report this sighting?
Not that I was aware of. In those days, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have computers, the internet, nothing of the sort. All we had was a local newspaper, and I didn't see anything in the local newspaper about it. I didn't report it to anyone because I didn't know at that time who to report it. I didn't know there were organizations in existence. And this is the interesting thing. There is a side note I wish to provide about this. I don't know if you ever heard of a former astronaut called Dr. Brian O'Leary.
Yes, I met him once, yes.
Oh,
yes.
You did meet him once, yeah. He authored some astounding books about free energy and so on. But he came to England and I met him because I organized him to give a talk at a boys' school near where I lived at the time. And I described this sighting to him, and Brian stood back in amazement and he said to me, "You received an initiation." And I said to him, if that was an initiation, it was an initiation from space, because these objects were in our atmosphere, maybe somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 feet in altitude. So that, Alan, is my my introduction to the whole subject topic of the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Now,
So I just want to
in
say,
that,
would you
yeah,
say that sighting has changed your life, set the trajectory of your life?
ab- absolutely, that day was a change in my life. I suddenly became conscious of the fact that number one, we're not alone in the universe, and number two, I attempted a telepathic contact with the objects by framing some questions in my mind and essentially throwing them at the objects. And I was astounded because I received some replies, one of which I did not understand until 2 years later. But that's another story in how I came across the famous British contactee known as George King. I don't know if you.
But I do heard of George King. He was along with the other George Van Tassel, George Adamski. Those were the Georges of the early UFO. But what were the questions you threw at the UFOs, and what were the answers that came back?
Okay, I will. One question that really perplexed me. I asked them what were they doing. That was my based from a mathematical, scientific mind, questioning sort of mind. I said, "What are you doing?" And I received a reply that made no sense to me at the time. And that reply was a manipulation from Mother Earth. A manipulation from Mother Earth. Now, I was a 15-year-old schoolboy then. I had interest in sports and pop music. I had never regarded Earth as a mother in those days. My mother was living down the road in our home. So to the concept of a Mother Earth was very strange to me. But that was the day almost that wisdom dawned on me. It's as though a light shone from the sky into my head and said, "Wake up." And this question, this answer to my question, "What are you doing?" I did not explain because I didn't understand the term manipulation. I was not familiar with the concept of Mother Earth until 2 years later when I read one of George King's books called The Day the Gods Came. If anyone has never read this book, it's kind of almost essential to study to understand what was going on at that time around the world.
Well,
Uh, Sorry, carry on.
no, I just want to ask you, what does that mean, manipulation of Mother Earth or on Mother Earth? You said
It was a manipulation for Mother
for
Earth.
Mother Earth. Okay,
That's
and
what,
what does that mean? How does that play out?
as I later discovered, it was um, the propagation of spiritual energies for the Mother Earth, who has suffered so much for humanity. We have filled her rivers with our blood through warfare. We have torn at everything that we find on this earth. The deep mining, it's a kind of agreed for prosperity and ownership of gold and minerals and all the rest of the things that have uh, we've taken to build our so-called civilization. And I have to put that word in inverted commas. But this kind of race towards superiority and since the scientific revolution um, and the since the invention of the steam engine and how it opened up the world and the internal combustion engine started polluting the atmosphere, and we've been digging for oil endlessly since then, polluting our atmospheres and our rivers and the trees and the plants and the whole lot. So this was from a 15-year-old boy interested in pop music and sports. I suddenly became interested in the deeper aspects of metaphysics and what we have done to Mother Earth. And I referred to Earth as Mother Earth with great, deep respect and a spiritual understanding that she's actually a living being.
But
And
you
also,
know, it's only gotten much worse since 1964. It's only, if they were doing it back then,
yes,
we
and
learned
hence why these objects in the skies were doing some kind of manipulation to give Earth some spiritual energy, because things were getting worse, and they have got worse and worse. And today we're at a crossroads. Our civilization is on a precipice. We could fall over. And you know what I mean? I do mean the possibility of nuclear warfare. It says that the doomsday clock has moved closer to midnight, as you know, and we're teetering almost on the brink of a precipice, which we could fall over, and there would be no return from that. It would be like falling into a deep crater on the moon, from which you wouldn't be able to climb out of, or indeed even on this Earth.
So how did you get to Mars? I mean, not
Right. So
physically.
that got my interest in the subject of UFOs. So I went to the local Wimbledon library and found the first book on the subject, and it was a book called The Sky People, written by Lepage. At the time, I did not know that was a pen name for Earl of Clancarty, who sat in the House of Lords in the British uh, parliamentary system. There are two houses in Britain, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And the Earl of Clancarty sat in the House of Lords, and he wrote books about these arcane subjects. And this first book, called The Sky People, intrigued me very greatly, because I had seen objects in the sky. I had managed to achieve some sort of telepathic communication, and I was now truly intrigued. And then later on, I had to visit the United States. So, to cut a long story short, I went on to university, studied engineering, got a job with a computer company, and I had to come to the United States on some educational programs. And whilst there, I visited a friend in Detroit, and he gave me a book called Unusual Mars Surface Features, written by Vincent DiPietro and Gregory Molyneux. At this time, I had not been aware of this so-called face on Mars, and that brought me into this Martian investigation. I contacted Vincent DiPietro when I got back to England, and he was very happy to learn that at that time I was working for this computer company in their education department. And he said, you can obtain the raw images, the raw Viking images, from the Goddard Space Flight Center direct. And he told me how to do it. So I obtained the raw photographs of Mars that had been taken by the Viking orbiters. There were two orbiters, Viking 1 and Viking 2. So I managed to obtain these raw images, and we were able to enhance these at my workplace. And sure enough, there was a face on Mars, a huge face, about 1.5 miles in size. It looked like a face just staring up into space. And at that time, I told my colleagues, this was around 1990, and I told my colleagues, this is going to haunt scientists until the end of this millennium. It's still haunting them now. And there's been some chicanery on this part of NASA with obtaining a better photo of the face, and the Mars Global Observer took another picture of his face, and they issued a picture that had been modified very badly and poorly, and said this is just a pile of rocks. And so many scientists decided that it was nothing more than a pile of rocks. But since that time, NASA has taken many more photos of that pile of rocks, and it still looks like a face. There's an eyeball in the eye cavity, there's teeth in the mouth area, and all one can say is, if this is a rock that has been modified to look like a face staring up into space. Now, this is a human-like face. There is a possibility that it's got two parts to it. There could be a human part to it, and maybe a feline part to it, maybe almost like a lion, or some people might say a bit of an ape-like structure to the face. But whatever it is, it's a face, and it's there, and it's undeniable. And then people like Richard Hoagland and Dr. Carl Lotto had investigated the area as well, and there were found pyramidal structures in the area. So there was immediately a connection with Egypt and the pyramids of Egypt and the Great Sphinx at Egypt, which has a carved face. Uh, and that led me deeper and deeper into the investigation of the Martian
Let me
face.
ask you about the face. Some people have said, Linda Moulton Howe particularly said there was this intense expression on the face of Mars. Do you know about that from very
Well,
high tech development, fine tuning of the face, and also there's a sort of a headband, like an Egyptian sort of
yes,
headdress on the face. We'll talk
there,
about that.
there appears to be a structure across the forehead, and I myself have done a lot of enhancements of these images, and I worked with Professor Horace Crater, the late Professor Horace Crater, who was a physicist at the University of Tennessee Space Institute. And we did some image processing of the very latest NASA images of this. And Professor Crater said, when I showed him some of the pictures, he laughed. He said to me, it's as though that face is winking at us. That eye is winking at us. Is there a message here? And the message lay in some mounds nearby. About 10 miles from the face are some mounds that have been placed in a certain pattern. And Professor Crater analyzed the pattern, and he wrote a paper which was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration about this formation. So I'm going to show all of these pictures to the audience at Glastonbury. And the analysis of that pattern indicates intelligence. Somebody intelligently placed those 6 mounds to form a certain pattern. And I've even written a book about this, by the way.
So that's what's so exciting. This is a little teaser to get people to come to Glastonbury. You can in September 2024. It's ascensionglastonbury.com. You can hear all of Ananda's presentation and the really fantastic discoveries that maybe date back, what some people say, 1 million years for the structures on Mars.
We don't know. We don't know how old they are. They could be a billion. They could be 500 million years old. Mars had a warmer, wetter climate in the past, so it is very much like Earth, except it's half the size of Earth. But it had lakes and rivers, and it must have had clouds and rainfall and plantations and trees, and there is photographic evidence for lichens on Mars and moss on rocks on Mars.
But do you know the theory about the big nuclear explosion? I forgot the guy who put that together on Mars. This radiation
Yes,
pattern, and
I'm
I'm
familiar with that. That's sponsored by Dr. John Brandenburg.
Yeah,
Uh,
Brandon.
Yeah, I'm currently the president of SPSR, the Society for Planetary Safety Research, which was founded by Professor Horace Crater together with Professor Stanley McDaniel, a philosopher working out of Santa Rosa, California. And so the two of them founded SPSR, and Dr. John Brandenburg I know very well because he's a member of SPSR. And he came over to England and met me in around about the year 1990, when I just was starting my research into Mars. So there's many exciting things to show about the Mars, including the photographs of the surface features, the face, the pyramids, the mound configuration layout, and the results of the Viking lander experiments. Both landers put down pods in 2 different areas of Mars and conducted search for life, of microbial life, obviously.
And what did they? And you're saying they actually found microbial life there?
Yes, indeed. There were three different distinct experiments, and each of them gave an unmistakable signal for life. And the one of them was designed by Dr. Gilbert Levin. And to his dying day, he said that experiment, which is called the label release experiment, found evidence of microbial life on Mars. But
Well,
NASA,
how do you know that if that was never publicized? I mean, made public. You know that's true.
well, because I've been in touch with Dr. Gilbert Levin, and we have statements by him on um, the web, our SPSR website. Okay. So there's lots of researchers who had published papers, scientific papers, peer-reviewed papers on these matters, and Dr. Gilbert Levin, without a doubt, uh, designed the experiment according to NASA specifications. So now that the experiment discovered the sign signals of life, it's quite rich for NASA to turn around and say this is nothing but chemicals reacting on the surface of Mars. And it's never been proven.
And why do you think they're denying the fact that not only is there microbial life, but there's probably life still there? We can talk about
Yes,
that also in
well,
the. Go
as
ahead.
anyone who has scientific upbringing knows, well, we have the theory of evolution. So if there's microbial life somewhere, that microbial life may have evolved into multicellular organisms, maybe eventually animals, maybe eventually humanoids. We don't know for sure, but there are the claims made by the contactees. You mentioned three of the Georges, George Adamski, George King, and so forth. They've all claimed that there is some advanced life on the other planets in this solar system. So we don't need to venture out of this solar system at this stage, at this point in time, because that's far enough. It takes us long enough to get to the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, and Pluto.
Yeah.
And Pluto, I notice I call Pluto a planet. You're muted, Alan.
In the late 1890s, when telescopes became more common and people were looking at Mars, they saw a series of canals. H.G. Wells wrote about, in kind of negative way, the War of the Worlds, but he did.
Percival Lovell,
Yeah.
Schiaparelli. Yeah, they also these canals. It looks like the surface of Mars has changed quite a bit since the 1890s. Yes,
Oh, really? It's changed, but
it's changing still, even today. So
in
some of the objects we have discovered on Mars, the photographs, as we said earlier, could be many millions of years old. But erosion on Mars is not as pronounced as it is on Earth because there is no atmosphere on Mars at the moment. Yeah, there may have been a very thick atmosphere at one time when there were lakes and oceans and rivers and rainfall and so forth. But if Mars has lost its atmosphere, therefore it's become a dry, cold planet. And in those under those conditions, other than wind erosion, there's no weathering of rocks, except for a very long period of time. So these interesting things, Mars is probably an abode for advanced life. That's advanced beyond us, our level of human humanoid frame. We don't know what there's a lot of information out there, and people would need to read some very interesting books. And the contactee, the British contactee, George King, was the one I think who gave most information about this. He went beyond Adamski and George von Tassel and all the other 1950s contactees. And I personally investigated George King for many, many years. So there's a whole lot of issues around the subject of extraterrestrial life. And when we say extraterrestrial life, we mean anything from outside of this Earth, whether it's on the moon or Mars or Venus or Jupiter. of Saturn, that's all extraterrestrial life, but within this solar system.
Right. Well, there's been rocks that supposedly have bounced from Mars to the Earth, and they found like these in Antarctica. But besides that, the lava tubes, if that's what they are, the tunnels or the canals on Mars, it looks like the best place for maybe sophisticated life is still inhabiting. Do you think that might be true?
That might be true. You see, a lava tube, some of these are enormous in size. You could easily get a large town inside a lava tube on Mars. Uh, and these are kind of naturally formed um, places for in which to hide almost anything you want to hide, because you can't see inside the lava tubes from the surface photographs. So that possibility certainly exists. And I know, for example, Dr. Mark Palotto, who wrote the book called The Martian Enigmas. He thinks that we need to investigate the lava tubes much more. The possibility is one day when humanity does get to Mars, and I don't think it'll happen very quickly yet, uh, we will have people living in these natural shelters, away from the cosmic radiation coming from the sun.
Well, don't you think there's actually Martians, we call them Martians, actually living there now? I mean,
Yes,
where the atmosphere was destroyed, they built these
there's.
underground
You're
and
probably aware of the studies done in remote viewing and psychic
yes, yes,
visualization.
yes,
Many of those people, like Joe McMonagle and Ingo Swann, have said that they have seen objects beneath the surface of Mars. So there is, my personal belief is that there is civilization on a very advanced civilization on Mars, and the only way we can uh, uh, talk with them is through communication. See, this whole UFO subject is interesting because UFOs have been appearing since the 1930s around the world, and yet the claim is that there is no open contact. Well, the 1950s contact, he said, yes, there has been contact. We have been contacted by Martians and Venusians, and there are advanced races out there who are coming to tell us, to warn us not to destroy our planet. Do
right.
not destroy our planet. If you have a nuclear war, you will surely burn out this civilization, and we'll have to start from the beginning again in a nightmarish world of radioactivity and so forth. So uh, many scenarios about what could happen with a nuclear winter and the death of all of life on Earth,
Yeah.
including the plants and the animals, and of course humanity as well. So
Mm,
there's been warnings given to us time and time again.
mm.
And
So,
sorry, next question.
no, no. Do you think that happened on Mars, or what's your? There's
Sorry,
obviously monuments there. There's
well, the monuments on the surface of Mars are probably remnants of the ancient civilization that was on Mars
yeah,
and that had to move underground or move into another plane of existence because the planet lost its atmosphere. When a planet loses its atmosphere, then obviously the resultant need for water and oxygen and other gases disappears. So um, what you could do then is to be safe from the cosmic radiations, because an atmosphere cuts out a lot of cosmic radiations. And to what you would do is then move underground in order to keep the civilization going. And as I said, they may also have moved on to a higher plane of existence. Just like we have our physical plane here, you and I are talking on the physical plane, but we know there are other planes on this earth where people go to when they die, and they stay there for a while until their rebirth. So this is ancient religious teaching coming from the East. It's nothing new, the belief in karma and rebirth, karma and reincarnation. So just as there are other planes on this earth, there must be other planes on other planets as well. And
Right. Of course, they wouldn't be having life there in the way we know life, but I do think there's microbial life. I do think there's human-like life, probably in the latitudes. They may be higher spiritually, but I think they're still physical. They're in the latitude or these canals, whatever you call them.
yes, and I think the existence of microbial life was definitely proven by the Viking lander experiments. That's scientific fact. And anyone who studies the science there will have to say, well, yeah, these are signals for life. The other one is the possibility of the Martians moving onto a higher plane of existence. Well, even on this Earth, we have highly developed psychics and mediums who can peer into the other planes on this Earth.
Yes,
But we're kind of stuck on the physical plane with a limited range of visibility and sensors. But we have developed a science that has produced instrumentation that can go beyond the ultraviolet and the infrared, as you know. So we're on the verge of great discoveries. I think we will eventually build cameras that can peer into the other planes of this Earth and see what's going on there. There may be.
Yeah. No, there's also those mound like dome type structures on the surface of Mars. Have you noticed? Have you seen
Well,
pictures?
there's been claims that there's some on the surface of the moon. A few years ago, I was working with some colleagues at the Lunar project, and we discovered that the Apollo 15 astronauts photographed some objects in a crater called Paracelsus C. So I discovered these photographs lying in the NASA archives. So I said to my colleagues at Lunar, let's see what the latest photos look like, taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And sure enough, in that crater Paracelsus C are three intriguing objects. One looks like a wall, one looks like a building about the size of a car park on Earth, and between them is an intriguing bracket-like object. Now, I've published all of these in one of my books called Something Strange on the Lunar Surface. And now, my books I would love to present to people at Glastonbury, because my books are factual, they're based on proper science. I present the photographs that were taken by the Apollo 15 crew. They're clearly in the archives in NASA. Anyone can go and find them, except that on those, they're very small. It took me a lot of time to find the actual object in the crater, Paracelsus C. But when we discovered the much better photos, we realized these are very unusual objects. So there are unusual objects on the moon, there are unusual objects on Mars, and now we're on the verge of discovering unusual objects on the planet Venus as well.
Oh, really? They've gotten. I thought Venus was imperceptible because of the clouds. What do you think is on Venus?
Well, the Russians landed successfully on Venus for a short while because it's very hot on the surface, and their rockets failed after so many minutes, as you would expect. In a very high temperature, the electronics and so on cannot last forever. So we're discovering that there is the possibility of life in the atmosphere of Mars, because we have discovered phosphine in the atmosphere of Mars. Now, phosphine is an indicator of life, just like on Mars there's methane, which is an indicator of life as well. On Earth, living things produce methane, especially our cattle, cows and bulls and so on. They produce methane, and as you know, because we eat so much meat on this Earth, we have an agricultural system geared to producing meat by rearing cattle, and cattle produce methane, and that methane escapes into our atmosphere. Well, on Mars, there are periodic cycles of methane production, which are possibly from the microbes on the surface of Mars.
But it's methane. You call it saying methane. You say methane. I say methane. But
That's
methane, is it only produced? Could it be a natural phenomenon like natural
it can
gas?
be. It
Yeah,
can be. Methane, as you call it. Sorry, we have different pronunciations. I have I have a British English pronunciation. You have a wonderful American pronunciation. Methane can occur naturally. Plants produce methane as well as they rot, but so do living things like animals.
But getting back to Mars, there are these dome-like structures on the surface of Mars. You've seen pictures
Right.
of that, right?
On Mars is this configuration of six mounts, which, as I explained, were analyzed by my good friend, late Professor Hosrtory. And these six mounts form a very precise mathematical fit. And I'll be showing the people at Glastonbury actual photographs taken by Viking, taken later by the Mars Global Observer, and also the European Space Agency. So those mounds, which are twice the size of the Giza pyramids, they're between 1 and 2 times the size of the Giza pyramids, have been laid out in a certain uh, mathematical precision to create a structure on the surface of Mars. And when Professor Crater analyzed this configuration, he was absolutely astounded at the mathematics within it. And I'm going to reveal what that is on the day at Glastonbury. I will tell the audience what that mathematical analysis indicates as far as the mount configuration on Mars is concerned. It's intriguing.
It's great. There's so much to talk about on Mars because yes, it's been hidden. I don't know why they're hiding the fact that life is probably everywhere in the universe. I mean, everywhere, every planet. I mean, there's oceans under that, on the moon of
Titan,
Jupiter.
yes,
Right. So
indeed.
I think, and plus the work of Gary Nolan says that DNA is older than the Earth itself. So
Yes,
probably you agree with that, right?
yes. I've been interested in the work of Gary Nolan. Yes, and
But so, what scenario would you create if you were going to sort of make it up based on the facts that you know about the civilization? It lived, it was destroyed. I mean, are you putting
right.
together a story like that?
Yes. Well, this is a very large subject. Let me go back to the British contactee George King, and he stated this on the public platform many times. He stated that some of our great spiritual leaders actually came from the other planets and were born as human beings with the human limitations in order to ignite the spark of spirituality within man. And that makes a lot of sense to me. As I said to you, I was born in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is essentially a Buddhist and Hindu country. And within the religion of Buddhism, there's never been a denial of extraterrestrial life, because the Buddha himself said life exists throughout the cosmos. And this is based on his meditations, on both on the human condition on this earth and outside of Earth. So he said that there is life out there, and he said he himself was from another planet. This is in the Buddhist texts. We know our Buddhism and learn our Buddhism from the Buddhist texts. So this is these are intriguing pathways of learning that we need to understand the origins of the religions on this earth, and uh, why we need our spark of spirituality to be lit, because we're not very good at lighting it ourselves. It's got to be kindled.
No, I know what you're saying about spirituality, but I think we also have to just establish the facts that there are definitely anomalies on Mars. And speaking of Mars, the moons of Mars, the it's a smaller one. It's definitely an odd shaped thing. And didn't they find a monolith on one of the moons that the Russians took?
Well, first of all, many years ago, I interviewed Arthur C. Clarke. Now, well, he lived in Sri Lanka. Arthur C. Clarke, as you know, wrote the plot for the film 2001, Space Odyssey. And the basic theme of that plot is that our terrestrial astronauts go to the moon and find a monolith on the moon. Well, guess what? This wall in Paracelsus C looks like a monolith. Now, I wonder whether Arthur C. Clarke knew about the photographs that the Apollo 15 astronauts took. I don't know. At that time, I discussed the monolith on the moon, but that was from a point of view of an excellent film, a movie with a storyline, quite intriguing storyline, by the way. So he was an interesting man, and we discussed. I discussed UFOs with him. I discussed astrology with him. I discussed the whole question of whaling on Earth, and he said he was dead against whaling operations, and he was doing his utmost to stop whaling around the world. Unfortunately, he didn't quite succeed 100%, but he succeeded to a great extent to stop a lot of the killing of whales, who are our brothers, although they live in the sea. So we have to show humanity not just to ourselves, but to all the living things on this planet. And the day will come when we will have to have social meetings with beings from other planets. And I think that day is getting closer and closer. What has happened, unfortunately, is that the authorities of the world have placed a cover-up on the subject of the UFO contacts that have taken place. This is very unfortunate. That cover-up should be reversed, and reversed immediately, because the people of Earth need to know. They have the right to know. We, as human citizens, have the right to know that we're being approached by beings, advanced beings from other worlds, both in this solar system and outside of this solar system.
Well, one of his best books was Childhood's End, where he talks about great masters coming down. Yes. But what about the moons of Mars? Because they also look very strange. What's their name?
Yeah, well, there have been theories going back to the 1960s and the time when Carl Sagan joined up with a Russian astronomer, and that Russian astronomer suggested that the moons of Mars are artificial objects. Well, they look like captured asteroids, but it's easy for an advanced nation to capture an asteroid and put kind of intelligence into it. So there may be natural satellites that were used as space stations, and probably still are being used as space stations.
I don't think our moon is a natural satellite. I think it's been placed there. I mean, the way it eclipses perfectly.
Our moon is a very strange structure, isn't it? A very strange structure.
It is. And it's important to live on Earth, actually, because it balances the oceans and the atmosphere. There's a lot.
Without the tidal waves, we would not have life on Earth. And another strange thing is it subtends half a degree in the sky, exactly the same as the sun. So that's why we can have a total eclipse. And it's strange that we see only one side of the moon. And by the way, these objects in the crater Paracelsus C are on the far side of the moon, the side that we cannot see. Only spacecraft going around can photograph the far side of the moon, which is why the Apollo 15 crew, as they went around, photographed, and as they went over the crater Paracelsus, they took these photos, and I will be showing those photos to the audience, and I will tell them how you can discover them for yourselves in the NASA archives. You don't have to take my word for it. You can do your own research.
No, that's great. The Japanese are sending a craft to the far side of the moon, I think this year sometime. Did you see that?
China just launched a spacecraft to recover samples from the far side of the moon. They just launched it this week.
Right,
So
and did you NASA press conference where some congressperson asked NASA, well, why are the Chinese going to the far side of the moon? And they said, well, we don't know, but obviously somebody knows what's going on. But it's very exciting. You coming to Glastonbury. Everyone should check out Ananda in Glastonbury. Get a ticket at ascensionglastonbury.com, September 27th to the 29th, 2024. It's going to be a fantastic conference. I can't wait to see those pictures.
I'm looking forward to my presentation on the Friday of that weekend.
Yes. Any more little teasers you want to give the audience? Because you've given us a lot today.
Well, we have covered a lot. Other than to say, I have written 5 books. As I said, these books deal with the subject of UFOs, subject of the moon, the subject of the mound configuration on Mars, and I've also done quite a bit of research into Buddhist cosmology. So I've written a book called Other Worlds in Buddhism. But these are not Shakespearean by any means. My writing is fairly simple, fairly straightforward, but easy to read and hopefully easy to understand. So I'll be telling people about these. Those are the teasers.
So you kind of combine your work with a kind of spiritual perspective and also hardcore science.
Correct. Correct. I think we need to do that. We need to synthesize science with spirituality. If we're to save our planet.
Yeah, how can people find you now?
Okay, the website is very easy. spsr.nmcc.edu. Okay, I'll put that in the chat window.
The books are, what's the name of the books that you have?
That's the website. I've just put that in there. That's the website for the Society for Planetary Safety Research, SPSR. Okay.
And what's the name of your books?
My first book is called, and I'll put this in the text again. This book is called Massive Vimana, or the Atomic Weapons Establishment. It's about an amazing sighting of a massive object over the AWE.
The AWE is what?
Atomic Weapons Establishment in England. It does work for the American military as far as atomic weapons is concerned. And in 2004, in September 2004, a couple observed this massive object, which is the size of 2 football fields, hovering over the atomic weapons establishment. They happened to be driving past on an early Saturday morning when they saw this. So I researched it and wrote that in there. Okay. So that was my first book. The other book is called Something Strange on the Lunar Surface. Sure.
Okay, Something Strange on the Lunar Surface, and then you have the book about Mars too that you wrote.
Yeah, that's called The Mound Configuration on Mars.
One last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think UFOs target people, like specifically for you to see them, or like that couple? I mean, is there?
Yes, I think this is a question that has been asked of me. Why you? Why me? Why did 3 objects appear over the heads of 3 schoolboys on the 8th of July, 1964? All I can say is it changed my life. So that it's as though a beam of light shot down on my head and said, wake up. You need to turn your mind around. And now, many years later, it's over 50 years since that experience, I'm beginning to realize that we need to synthesize science with spirituality if we're to save this planet from total degradation is perhaps the best word for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ananda, for what you're doing. And
Thank you for speaking with me, Alan, for inviting me. As I said, I look forward to coming to Glastonbury and my
yes,
presentation on the Friday of that weekend.
it'll be fantastic. It will be. I hope people will come, be there, see you, meet you, and see the evidence. Of course,
Yeah.
we're not alone.
Photographic evidence. Photography.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you. Thank you.